He, a powerful boss, never imagined that a simple secretary could unravel his self-control. She, a young virgin, kept her distance, but inexplicably drew his gaze. When desire finally consumed them, everything he had ever known crumbled. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. The cold November wind beat against the windows of the 27th floor, creating a sound that Vincent Hayes knew by heart. It was the same sound that had accompanied him every morning for the past 8 years, ever since he had taken full control of Hayes Publishing, transforming it into the largest publishing house in the country. From his office, he could see New York City stretching out like a sea of concrete and broken dreams, and sometimes he wondered if he himself wasn't just another piece of wreckage in that immensity. Vincent had always been a man of absolute control. At 42, he had built an empire based on iron discipline and the ability to maintain an emotional distance from everyone and everything. His suits were tailor-made, his gestures calculated, his words chosen with the precision of a surgeon. In the press, he was described as a visionary. In the hallways of the publishing house, they whispered that he had no heart. Vincent preferred the second version. It was safer. The elegance of his movements was almost robotic. He always arrived at 7 in the morning, greeted the employees with a nod, and reviewed the sales reports with the coldness of someone analyzing stock market charts. His desk was always impeccable, pens aligned, papers organized, a cup of coffee that he drank in small sips as if each movement were part of a rehearsed choreography. But behind the public image, Vincent carried a scar that had never completely healed. He had been married once, 10 years ago, to Isabella, a brilliant architect he had met at a gallery opening on the Upper East Side. The marriage lasted only 2 years, long enough for her to get pregnant, and for him to discover what it was to love someone more than his own life. Gabriel was born on a spring morning, with his mother's eyes and a cry that filled the apartment with hope. 3 months later, the baby died. Sudden infant death syndrome, the doctors said. No explanation, no one to blame, no way to have prevented it. Vincent arrived home from work that Tuesday in December and found Isabella in the baby's room, holding the lifeless little body, repeating softly that he was just sleeping. The marriage did not survive the grief. Isabella moved to London 6 months later, claiming she could no longer breathe in the same country where Gabriel had been born and died. Vincent never saw her again. Since then, he had taken refuge in his work with the obsession of a man trying to escape ghosts. The publishing house grew, prospered, became synonymous with literary quality in the United States. But Vincent remained alone, locked in a glass tower of his own making, where no one dared to enter, and he did not dare to leave. It was a Monday in July when Clara Barnes appeared in his life. She arrived at the scheduled time for the internship interview, at 2 in the afternoon, wearing a navy blue blazer that looked like it had been bought on sale, but which she wore with the dignity of someone unashamed of her limitations. The resume in her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness but from the cold. Vincent noticed she wasn't wearing a coat, despite the New York winter being particularly harsh that year. At 26, Clara had a degree in literature from a Catholic university near Albany, with a specialization in American literature that had cost the last cents of the inheritance left by the grandparents who raised her. She was tall, too thin, with brown hair always tied in a low bun from which a few rebellious strands escaped. Her eyes were large, expressive, the kind that seemed to see more than they should. During the interview, Vincent noticed something that bothered him deeply. Clara knew him. Not personally, but she knew his work with an intimacy that went beyond what would be normal for an intern candidate. She cited books the house had published 5 years earlier, mentioned interviews he had given to specialized magazines, and spoke about the house's editorial line with a passion that sounded almost intimate. "Why do you want to work specifically here?" he asked, observing how she avoided his direct gaze. Clara hesitated for a moment, her hands clutching the strap of her worn handbag. "Because you publish books that matter," she finally said. "Books that stay with people, that change something inside. I've always wanted to be a part of that." There was something in her voice, a raw sincerity that Vincent hadn't heard in years. Most candidates came with prepared speeches about growth opportunities and professional development. Clara spoke like someone who truly believed in the transformative power of words. "Do you read a lot?" he asked. "Too much, maybe," she replied, and this time her eyes met his for an instant, before looking away again. "My grandmother used to say I'd go crazy from reading so much, that it wasn't proper for a good girl to have her head buried in books all day." Vincent felt something stir in his chest, a strange sensation he couldn't identify. "And do you believe that?" Clara smiled for the first time since entering the room, a small but genuine smile. "If that were true, I would have been committed a long time ago." He hired her on the spot. Clara started work the following Thursday, occupying a desk in the editorial department, where she would do the first reading of manuscripts and assist with copy editing. She always arrived 15 minutes early, greeted everyone with a quiet "good morning," and settled at her desk as if not to disturb anyone. She always wore the same 3 blouses, one white, one light blue, and one beige, which she alternated during the week, and carried her lunch in a plastic container that she heated in the break room microwave. Vincent began to notice her without realizing it. It was subtle at first, the way she organized the papers on her desk with almost ritualistic care, how she always placed her pen at the same angle, how she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on her reading. She worked in silence, never complained, never asked for favors. It was as if she were trying to occupy the smallest possible space in the world, but she occupied it. Especially in Vincent's mind, who found himself paying too much attention to the sound of her footsteps in the hallway, to the subtle scent of herbal shampoo she left in the air when she passed near his office, to the way her long fingers turned the pages of the manuscripts. She was a discreet, almost ghostly presence, but one that became more palpable with each passing day. "She's different," commented Marcia, the editorial coordinator, one afternoon in August. "I can't quite explain it, but there's something special about that girl. She reads the texts as if they were personal letters. Yesterday I saw her crying over a short story about paternal abandonment." Vincent pretended not to be paying attention, but every word was etched in his memory. That night, he went home thinking about the image of Clara with tear-filled eyes because of a text, and wondered what kind of life she had lived to be so moved by other people's stories. The first real conversation between them happened on a Friday, when Vincent had to work late to review the publisher's annual report. It was past 9 at night, when he noticed a light was still on in the editorial department. He found Clara bent over a manuscript, making notes in a small, careful hand. "Do you always stay this late?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Clara started, dropping her pen, which made a sharp noise on the floor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. I was finishing this manuscript and lost track of time. I'm leaving now. No need to apologize, and you can call me Vincent." He entered the room, noticing how small she seemed under the cold office light. "What are you reading?" "It's a debut novel. The author writes about women who work in textile mills in the rural South. It's very good." Clara hesitated before continuing. "She manages to show the strength of these women without romanticizing poverty. It's rare." Vincent approached the desk, feeling her soft scent mixed with the smell of paper. "And would you recommend it for publication?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, "even knowing it might not sell much. It's the kind of book that needs to exist." There was a conviction in Clara's voice that impressed Vincent. She didn't speak like an intern trying to please her boss, but like someone who truly believed in what she was saying. He picked up the manuscript, his fingers brushing against hers for an instant, and felt an electric current shoot up his arm. "I'll take a look," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "And Clara, thank you for staying late to finish this." She nodded, quickly gathering her things. "You're welcome. It's a pleasure to work with books like this." When she left, Vincent was alone in the room, holding the manuscript and still feeling the warmth of her touch on his fingers. There was something profoundly unsettling about that moment. Not just the physical attraction he was trying to deny, but the feeling that Clara saw books the same way he did, as if they were living beings with their own souls. That night, Vincent read the entire manuscript. Clara was right. It was an exceptional work, with a rare sensitivity for portraying the human condition. But what impressed him most was realizing that she had identified qualities in the text that he himself would have taken time to notice. There was something in the way Clara read that went beyond technique or academic knowledge. It was almost a gift. From that day on, Vincent began to invent excuses to talk to her. He asked for her opinion on covers, inquired about editorial projects, created situations to be alone with her for a few minutes. Clara always responded with seriousness and intelligence, but maintained a respectful distance that only increased his frustration. There was something about her gestures that intrigued him deeply. The way she avoided any casual physical contact, how she moved away when he got too close, how she always kept her hands busy with papers or pens when they talked. It was as if she were afraid of her own body, or of his. She was raised by her grandparents, he learned through Marcia, who had a strange ability to find out the personal lives of the employees. Her parents died in an accident when she was little. The grandparents were very strict evangelicals, the kind who consider even dancing a form of sin. The girl grew up in a small town outside of Albany, in a house where they weren't even allowed to have a television. Vincent absorbed this information with a veracity that frightened him. Every detail about Clara's life became a piece of a puzzle he desperately wanted to assemble. He began to understand her shyness, the cautious way she moved through the world, as if she were constantly apologizing for existing. It was on an afternoon in September, when the first autumn rains began to fall on New York, that Vincent decided to cross the invisible line he had drawn between them. Clara was organizing manuscripts in the archive room when he appeared, closing the door behind him. "I need your help with something," he said, approaching the table where she was working. "Of course, Vincent. How can I help?" She didn't look up from the papers, but he noticed how her hands slowed, became more careful. "I want you to read a manuscript for me, but it's personal. It can't leave this room." This time she looked at him, and Vincent saw something in her eyes that made him hesitate. It was fear, but also curiosity, as if she knew that what he was about to say would change something between them forever. "What kind of manuscript?" she asked, her voice lower than usual. Vincent pulled open a locked drawer in his desk and took out an envelope, yellowed with time. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out to Clara. "I wrote this a few years ago. I've never shown it to anyone. In fact, I never thought I would." He paused, fighting against the voice that threatened to break. "But I'd like to know what you think." Clara took the envelope carefully, as if it were something sacred. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper before she looked back at Vincent. "Why me?" she asked. Vincent didn't know what to answer. He couldn't say that there was something in the way she read that made him feel his words would be safe with her. He couldn't admit that he had spent weeks watching her, studying every gesture, every expression, every moment of vulnerability she let slip. He couldn't confess that she had become the first person in years to awaken something in him beyond professional interest. "Because I trust you," he finally said, and it was the purest truth he could offer. Clara put the envelope in her bag, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I'll read it tonight and give you an answer tomorrow." "Clara." Vincent reached out, almost touching her arm, but stopped himself at the last moment. "It's about my son, about what happened to him." She was very still for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I know. I read the interview you gave to the Paris Review in 2015. You mentioned you had written something but never published it." Vincent felt the world spin slightly. "You read that interview?" "I did," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "In fact, it was because of it that I wanted to work here." There was so much weight in those words that Vincent had to lean on the table. Clara had sought out the publishing house because of him, because of an interview where he had opened up for the only time about the pain of losing Gabriel. This meant she knew him on a level he hadn't given anyone permission to reach. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Clara finally faced him, and for the first time Vincent saw something beyond shyness in her eyes. There was a deep sadness there, an understanding that came from someone who also knew pain up close. "Because you wrote about loss without playing the victim. Because you spoke about love without melancholy. Because—" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Because you seemed like someone who understood that sometimes we need to break before we can fix ourselves." Vincent felt something shatter in his chest. How many years had it been since anyone had seen beyond the mask he had built? How long had it been since anyone had looked at him and seen the man behind the successful businessman? "Clara," he began, but she was already moving away, grabbing her bag and walking toward the door. "I'll read your manuscript," she said without turning around. "And thank you for trusting me." When she left, Vincent was alone in the archive room, surrounded by thousands of stories by other authors, but thinking only of the woman who he had just discovered might be the first person to truly see him since Gabriel had died. That night, he couldn't sleep, imagining Clara reading his most intimate words, discovering the secrets he had guarded on paper, like someone burying treasures or demons. Clara didn't sleep that night. Sitting on the single bed in her rented room in Queens, a tiny space she shared with 3 other girls, she held Vincent's manuscript as if holding a still-beating heart. The 27 typewritten pages told the story of a man who had lost everything he loved on an ordinary Tuesday in December. The text was titled, "A Letter to Gabriel," and it was exactly that, a long, painful letter written by a father to his dead son. Vincent wrote about the plans he had made to teach the boy to ride a bike, about the stories he would tell before bed, about how he imagined it would be to watch him grow up and become a man. But he also wrote about the irrational guilt of coming home late from work the day Gabriel died, about waking up in the middle of the night, searching for the baby's cry that would never come again. The prose was clean, without self-pity, but charged with a brutal honesty that made Clara cry without being able to stop. There was one passage in particular that hit her like a punch to the gut. "Sometimes I wake up thinking you're in the next room, waiting for me to come get you for breakfast. Then I remember there is no next room, there is no you, there are no mornings worth living. But I get up anyway, because I know you would want me to keep trying to be the man you deserved as a father." Clara had to stop reading several times to catch her breath. There was something in Vincent's pain that echoed her own, though they were completely different losses. She had never lost a child, but she intimately knew the feeling of having the ground pulled out from under her feet, of waking up in a world that suddenly made no sense. When she finished reading, it was already 4 a.m. Clara put the manuscript in her nightstand drawer and stared at the ceiling, trying to organize her thoughts. Vincent had placed in her hands the most precious thing he owned, his pain transformed into art, and she knew exactly why. She had lied to him about having read the interview by chance. In truth, Clara had been following Vincent's work for years, ever since she discovered the publishing house during research for college. She read every interview he gave, knew the books he published by heart, and knew he had studied literature before inheriting the publishing house from his father. But it was in that specific interview for the Paris Review that she had fallen in love with him. Not with the powerful, successful man who appeared in business magazines, but with the heartbroken father who had dared to speak about loss in a society that preferred to pretend death didn't exist. Vincent had spoken about Gabriel with a tenderness that broke Clara's heart, and when the reporter asked if he had considered writing about the experience, Vincent replied, "I have, but some words are too heavy to be shared." It was in that moment that Clara decided that one day she wanted to work with someone who understood the weight of words in that way. The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual, even before Vincent. She had rehearsed what she would say, but when he appeared at her office door at 8 o'clock sharp, wearing a dark grey suit that highlighted the silver strands at his temples, all the words fled her mind. "Good morning, Clara," he said, and she noticed a tension in his voice that wasn't there before. "Were you able to read it?" "I was," she replied, taking the manuscript from her bag with hands that trembled slightly. "Vincent, we need to talk about this." He closed the door behind him and sat in the chair in front of her desk, a complete reversal of their usual hierarchy. Clara saw how his hands were clenched on the armrests, how there were dark circles under his eyes, and she realized he had also spent the night awake. "Tell me," Vincent murmured, bracing himself for the worst. Clara took a deep breath, choosing each word carefully. "It's the most beautiful and most terrible thing I've ever read. It's a love letter disguised as a farewell, a prayer disguised as despair. She paused, searching for the exact terms. "It's a masterpiece about how to love someone, even after they've ceased to exist." Vincent was silent for a long moment, processing her words. "Do you think it should be published?" "No," Clara replied without hesitation, and saw the surprise in his eyes. "Not as it is. This text is yours. It's too intimate, too sacred. To publish it would be like selling your soul." She leaned forward, seeking his eyes. "But I think you should keep writing." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have an extraordinary talent for turning pain into beauty without lying about the pain." I mean, there are thousands of fathers and mothers who have lost children and who would feel less alone reading your words. Not this letter specifically, but other texts by you. Clara hesitated before continuing. Vincent, you could help a lot of people with your writing. Vincent leaned back in his chair, as if her words were physical and he needed distance to absorb them. There were unshed tears in his eyes, a vulnerability Clara had never seen in him. I haven't written since I finished that letter, he said softly. That was 5 years ago. I thought I had said everything I had to say. Maybe you just needed someone to listen first, Clara replied, and again there was that electric current in the air as their eyes met. Vincent slowly reached out his hand, covering Clara's fingers that held the manuscript. This time she didn't pull away, and the warmth of his touch spread up her arm like fire. Thank you, he said, and there was so much meaning in those 2 words that Clara felt her eyes fill with tears. Thank you, she replied. Thank for trusting me with something so important. They stayed like that for a few seconds, their hands touching over the paper that contained Vincent's deepest pain, transformed into art. Clara knew she had crossed an invisible line, that from that moment on, the relationship between them would be different. But she couldn't bring herself to care. It was Marcia knocking on the door that made them quickly separate. Vincent, you have a meeting with the marketing team in 10 minutes, she said, entering the room without noticing the tension in the air. Of course, Vincent replied, standing up and adjusting his suit. Clara, could you stop by my office later? I'd like to talk more about that editorial project. Yes, of course, she answered, trying to keep her voice normal as she put the manuscript back in her bag. When she was alone, Clara pressed her hands to her face and tried to calm her racing heart. Something was happening between her and Vincent that went far beyond a professional relationship, something that both scared and excited her. For the first time in her life, she was feeling a genuine attraction to a man, and it terrified her. Clara had grown up in a house where any expression of sexuality was seen as a sin. Her grandparents, Joshua and Mary, were active members of the Assembly of God Church in their town and had raised their granddaughter under the strictest religious precepts. From a young age, Clara had learned that her body was a temple to be preserved for marriage, that impure thoughts were traps of the devil, that a girl from a good family did not let any man touch her before reaching the altar. But there were other wounds, besides those inflicted by religion. When Clara was 15, the church's assistant pastor, a 40-year-old married man named Ezra, began to pay too much attention to her. At first it was just compliments on how she was growing up and becoming a pretty young lady. Then came the seemingly casual touches on her shoulder during services, the offers to drive her home, the invitations for private talks about spiritual matters. Clara knew something was wrong, but she had no words to define what it was. Ezra was respected in the community. A close friend of her grandparents, considered a man of God. When he started sending her text messages saying he was praying for her and that she was special in the Lord's eyes, Clara kept the feeling of disgust the words provoked to herself. The situation culminated one afternoon when Ezra offered Clara a ride after choir practice. In the car, he stopped in a secluded spot and began to talk about how Clara was becoming a woman and how that was a responsibility before God. Then he placed his hand on her leg, moving it slowly up her skirt, and said he was just blessing her so she would remain pure. Clara struggled and managed to get out of the car, running the 2 miles home. When she tried to tell her grandparents what had happened, they didn't believe her. Ezra was a man of God, they said. Clara must be misinterpreting his intentions, perhaps even provoking inappropriate situations with her behavior. After all, she had always been a different girl with her head full of books and strange ideas. From that day on, Clara closed herself off even more. She started wearing even looser clothes, keeping her distance from all men, and seeing her own body as something dangerous that provoked unwanted reactions. When she finished high school, she moved to New York for college, and her grandparents died from COVID during the pandemic, leaving her completely alone in the world. Now at 26, Clara had never been kissed willingly, had never felt desire for a man, had never allowed herself romantic fantasies. Her body remained untouched, not out of religious purity, but out of fear of giving in and discovering that deep down she was nothing more than an object to satisfy others' desires. But with Vincent, it was different. There was something in the way he looked at her that didn't make her feel like prey or an object of desire. It was as if he saw her whole, her intelligence, her sensitivity, the quiet strength she carried. And for the first time, Clara found herself wondering what it would be like to be touched by those hands, to be seen naked by those eyes, to be desired by that man. The thought scared her so much that she had to go to the bathroom and splash cold water on her face. The afternoon dragged on slowly, with Clara trying to concentrate on work, but failing miserably. Every time she heard footsteps in the hall, her heart raced, thinking it might be Vincent coming to call her. When he finally appeared at her office door, it was almost 6 in the evening, and most of the employees had already left. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked, and Clara noticed he had taken off his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong, masculine forearms that made her swallow hard. "Of course," she replied, grabbing a notepad to give herself a sense of security. Vincent's office was in the corner of the building, with enormous windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Clara had never been there alone with him, and the space felt intimately small despite its generous dimensions. Vincent closed the door and gestured to the leather armchair in front of his desk. "I want to make you a proposal," he said, perching on the edge of his desk instead of sitting behind it, placing himself closer to Clara. "I'm thinking of launching a new editorial line for the house. Memoirs, biographies, non-fiction texts that deal with deep human issues. Loss, overcoming, love, family. Things that really matter." Clara felt a genuine excitement. That would be wonderful. "The market is full of superficial books. People are hungry for authenticity." "Exactly," Vincent said, leaning forward. "And I want you to coordinate this line with me, choosing authors, defining the editorial line, editing the texts. It would be a significant promotion, obviously. New salary, greater responsibilities." Clara was speechless for a moment. It was much more than she had ever dreamed of when she accepted the internship. "Vincent, I don't know what to say. It's an incredible opportunity, but why me? There are editors with much more experience in the house." "Because you understand what we're trying to do here," he replied, and his voice became lower, more intimate. "Because when you read a text, you're not just looking for grammatical errors or structural problems. You're looking for the soul of the story. And that's rare, Clara. Rarer than you can imagine." There was something in the way he said her name that made her stomach clench. Clara realized that Vincent was very close, that she could smell his cologne mixed with the scent of coffee that always accompanied him, that if she reached out her hand, she could touch his face. "I accept," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "I want to be part of this project." Vincent smiled, a genuine warm smile that completely transformed his face. "Excellent. We can start next week. In fact, I already have our first author in mind." "Who?" Vincent hesitated for a moment, then stood up and went to the window, his back to her. "You." "Me? Vincent? I've never published anything. I've never written a book." "But you write," he said, turning to face her. "Marcia told me you're always scribbling in a notebook during lunch. And I'm sure that someone who reads with the sensitivity you have also writes with that same sensitivity." Clara felt her face heat up. It was true that she wrote poems, short essays, small reflections on life, but they were intimate texts, never intended to be read by others, much less published. "They're just personal notes," she murmured. "May I see?" Vincent's question was a request, not an order, but Clara knew that if she refused, she would be wasting a unique opportunity. With trembling hands, she opened her bag and took out the black-covered notebook where she wrote. It was a simple notebook, but the pages were filled with her careful handwriting, words she had poured onto the paper like someone confessing secrets to a diary. Vincent took the notebook gently and began to flip through it in silence. Clara watched his face as he read, seeing his eyebrows furrow in concentration, his lips curve slightly when something impressed him. The silence stretched for several minutes, until he finally closed the notebook and looked at her. "Clara," he said, and there was a look of astonishment in his voice. "This is extraordinary. Why did you never tell me you wrote like this?" "Because it's nothing special," she replied, trying to downplay it. "They're just random thoughts." "No," Vincent said firmly, getting up and moving to the chair beside her. "This is literature. It's poetry disguised as prose. He paused, searching for the right words. "It's the most honest voice I've read in a long time." Clara felt tears threatening to spill over. No one had ever spoken about her writing this way. No one had ever seen value in what she considered just a way to organize her thoughts. "I want you to write a book about growing up in a strict religious family," Vincent said. "About finding your own voice in a world that tries to silence it. About the strength it takes to be an independent woman in a society that still wants to put us in boxes." He leaned closer. "I want you to tell your story, Clara, because I'm sure there are thousands of women out there who need to hear that they're not alone." Clara was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face without her trying to stop them. The idea of turning her pain into something that could help other people was both terrifying and liberating. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You can," Vincent said, and without thinking he reached out to wipe a tear from her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost ghostly, but it provoked a reaction neither of them expected. Clara involuntarily leaned into his hand, closing her eyes for an instant, and Vincent felt as if the entire world had stopped in that moment. When she opened her eyes again, they were very close, and for the first time, Vincent saw something beyond shyness in her gaze. There was desire there, mixed with fear, as if she wanted something but didn't know if she deserved to have it. "Clara," he murmured, and there was an implicit question in the way he said her name. She didn't answer with words, but she also didn't pull away. And in that silence charged with possibilities, Vincent knew he had found something he thought he had lost forever: the will to risk himself for love again. The almost kiss that didn't happen that afternoon changed everything between Vincent and Clara. In the following days, every casual encounter in the hallway became a silent battle between desire and reason. They began to communicate through glances that lasted a second too long, through seemingly accidental touches that left trails of fire on their skin, through professional conversations laden with subtext. Vincent invented excuses to call Clara to his office. He needed her opinion on a cover, wanted to discuss the marketing strategy for a new release, requested her presence in meetings where her participation wasn't really necessary. Clara, for her part, began to work even later, knowing that Vincent also stayed at the office after hours and that they would inevitably end up alone again. The new editorial line became the official pretext for their meetings. Vincent had made Clara's promotion to associate editor official with a commensurate salary and a larger desk in the editorial department. But the real work happened after hours, when they discussed potential authors and projects with an intimacy that went far beyond professional. "We received an interesting proposal today," Vincent said one Thursday, showing Clara an email on his computer. It was the end of October, and autumn had arrived in full force in New York, filling the city with crisp air and golden leaves. A 50-year-old woman who wants to write about losing her teenage daughter in a car accident. She says writing has been her way of dealing with the grief. Clara read the email over his shoulder, unconsciously getting close enough to feel the warmth radiating from Vincent's body. "It's exactly the kind of project our line needs. Someone turning pain into art like you did." "Like we both did," Vincent corrected, turning slightly in his chair to look at her. "Have you started writing your book yet?" Clara had, in fact. Every night after returning home, she would sit at the tiny desk in her room and write about the girl who grew up in a house where laughing loudly was a sin, where wearing a skirt above the knee was a provocation, where questioning religious teachings was rebellion against God. She wrote about the confusion of growing up thinking her own body was a trap, about the loneliness of having no one with whom to share doubts and desires. "A few pages," she admitted, "but it's harder than I imagined. It's like opening wounds I've spent years trying to heal." Vincent got up from his chair, moving closer to her. "Can I help in any way? Read what you've written, offer suggestions?" "No," Clara replied quickly, blushing. "Not yet. It's too intimate." There was something in the way she said intimate that made Vincent's stomach clench. He found himself wondering what secrets Clara was putting on paper, what parts of her life she was exposing through her words. The idea of getting to know her through her writing, just as she had gotten to know him through the manuscript about Gabriel, was both exciting and terrifying. "I understand," he said, but he didn't move away. Instead, he reached out to tuck a strand of hair that had escaped from Clara's bun, an intimate gesture that made her heart race dangerously. Clara should have moved away. She should have maintained the professional distance they had been pretending to preserve. But when Vincent's fingers touched her neck, she closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time in her life, to feel what it was like to be touched by someone who truly desired her. "Clara," Vincent murmured, his voice hoarse with restrained desire. "What is happening between us?" She opened her eyes and found him very close, close enough that she could count the small wrinkles around his eyes, see the golden flecks in his dark irises, feel his breath brushing against her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just know that when I'm near you I feel like maybe I'm not invisible." The confession was like a punch to Vincent's chest. How could this extraordinary woman think she was invisible? How could anyone fail to see the light that emanated from her, the fierce intelligence mixed with a heartbreaking vulnerability? "You were never invisible to me," he said, leaning his face toward hers. "From the very first day you're all I can see." This time, as their faces drew closer, neither of them pulled back. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if they were both testing unknown territory. But when Clara sighed against his lips and her hands gripped his shirt, Vincent deepened the kiss with a passion that had been pent up for months. Clara had never been kissed like this. In fact, she had never really been kissed in any way that mattered. The only other kiss in her life had been at 17, a boy from church who had cornered her after a retreat and pressed his lips against hers in an aggressive, unpleasant way. But this was like discovering she had been breathing wrong her whole life. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, trying to regain control. "This is crazy," he murmured. "I'm your boss, you work for me." "I know," Clara replied, but she didn't move away. "We should stop." Yes, we should. But neither of them moved. They stood there, breathing the same air, knowing they had crossed a line from which there was no return. It was the sound of the phone ringing that brought them back to reality. Vincent answered with a slightly hoarse voice, trying to focus on the conversation about book distribution, while Clara fixed her hair and tried to calm her racing heart. From that day on, the tension between them became almost unbearable. They didn't kiss again, but they lived on a knife's edge, every conversation charged with unspoken desire, every glance a promise and a provocation. Vincent started working even later, hoping Clara would also stay so they could be alone. She, in turn, invented tasks to justify her presence at the office after everyone else had gone home. They talked about work, but their hands would touch when he passed her papers. She would lean over his desk in a way that her perfume left him dizzy. He would compliment her in ways that had double meanings. "So you have beautiful hands," he said one night, watching her flip through a manuscript. "They're an artist's hands. Hands that create beautiful things." Clara blushed to the roots of her hair. "Vincent, it's true," he insisted. "You have no idea how beautiful you are, how you drive me crazy just by looking at you." The words hung in the air between them like a dangerous confession. Clara knew she should say something to diffuse the tension, to put distance between them again, but she was tired of hiding, tired of pretending she didn't feel the same desire that burned in his eyes. "You drive me crazy too," she whispered, surprising them both with her courage. Vincent closed his eyes as if her words were a physical caress. "Clara, if we don't stop now, I won't be able to control myself much longer." "And what if I don't want you to control yourself?" The question left her mouth before she could think about what she was saying, but when she saw the expression on Vincent's face, desire mixed with a tenderness that made her want to cry, she knew she had spoken the truth. She was tired of being the woman who always denied herself, who always hid. She wanted to be seen, touched, desired. Vincent rose slowly from his chair, like a predator approaching its prey. But there was something reverent in his movements, as if Clara were something sacred that needed to be worshipped, not conquered. "Are you sure?" he asked, stopping just inches from her. "Once this happens, we can't go back." Clara looked him in the eyes and nodded. "I'm sure." Vincent was about to touch her when the fire alarm went off. The shrill, intermittent sound made them jump, separating them instantly. The smell of smoke began to seep under the door, and Vincent ran to check what was happening. "There's a fire on the 10th floor," he shouted over the alarm. "We have to get out now." Clara quickly grabbed her bag, but when they reached the elevator, they found it had been automatically disabled. The emergency stairs were crowded with employees from the upper floors trying to get down, creating a desperate and chaotic crowd. "The service elevator," Vincent said, pulling Clara by the arm. "Let's try that way." They ran down the opposite corridor, but when they reached the service elevator, it too was out of order. The smell of smoke was getting stronger, and confused evacuation instructions were coming through the building's intercom. "Vincent, I'm scared," Clara said, gripping his arm. "Nothing is going to happen to you," he replied, pulling her to him. "I promise." They tried the emergency stairs again, but the crowd had created a bottleneck on the lower floors. People were pushing each other, children were crying, and panic was spreading rapidly. That's when the lights went out. The building plunged into total darkness, illuminated only by the red emergency lights that blinked intermittently. The ventilation system had stopped, and the smoke was accumulating more quickly on the upper floors. "The generator must have failed," Vincent said, trying to stay calm. "Let's go back to the office and wait for the firefighters to arrive." But when they tried to go back, they found that the corridor door had automatically locked when the power went out. They were trapped in the elevator lobby, in near total darkness with the smoke getting thicker and thicker. Clara started to cough. Vincent took off his jacket and put it over her head, trying to filter the smoke. "Breathe through the fabric," he instructed. "We'll get out of here." But there was nowhere to go. The doors were locked. The elevators weren't working. The emergency stairs were impassable. They were effectively trapped. It was then that Vincent realized where they were, and the past came back like a blow. The smell of smoke, the feeling of desperation, the darkness dotted with red lights. It was exactly like that December night, 10 years earlier, when he had come home to find the apartment in flames. Isabella had been standing on the sidewalk in a state of shock, while firefighters tried to control the fire that had started in the baby's room due to a short circuit in the heater. Gabriel had died even before the fire. Sudden infant death syndrome had taken him during the afternoon, but the fire had destroyed everything that was left of him: his clothes, his toys, the crib where he slept. Vincent remembered running towards the burning building, trying to get inside to save the son who was already dead, only to be held back by firefighters who restrained him by force. "Vincent!" Clara's voice brought him back to the present. She was kneeling on the floor, coughing more intensely, and he realized he had been paralyzed by the memory. "I'm sorry," he said, kneeling beside her. "I'm here." But Clara saw something in his eyes that frightened her. It was as if he were seeing ghosts, as if he were in two places at once. "What happened?" she asked, holding his face between her hands. "The fire. Gabriel died in a fire," Vincent murmured, and Clara realized he was reliving the trauma. "No," she said firmly. "Gabriel didn't die in the fire. You told me, remember? He died of SIDS. The fire was afterward. It was just a coincidence." Vincent looked at her as if remembering where he was. "Clara, I'm here," she said, running her fingers through his hair. "And we're going to get out of here together." It was in that moment, in the midst of chaos and fear, that Vincent understood what he truly felt for Clara. It wasn't just physical desire or intellectual admiration. It was love, pure and simple. Love for this woman who had brought him back to reality when he was getting lost in memories, who could be strong even when she was terrified. "I love you," he said, the words leaving his mouth like a prayer. Clara felt her heart stop for a second. No one had ever said those words to her. No one had ever looked at her the way Vincent was looking at her in that moment. "I love you too," she replied, and it was the first time she had said those words and truly felt their weight. Vincent pulled her to him, kissing her with a desperate passion that tasted of fear and hope mixed together. Clara surrendered to the kiss completely, knowing that if they died there, at least she would have experienced what it was to love and be loved in return. That's when they heard voices from the other side of the door. "Is anyone in there?" a firefighter shouted. "Yes," Vincent replied, getting up and pounding on the door. "2 people trapped in here." It took another 20 minutes for the firefighters to get the door open, using specialized equipment to force the security system. When they finally emerged from the smoky lobby, Clara and Vincent were coughing intensely, but they were alive. The fire on the 10th floor had been contained, the result of a short circuit in the server room. There were no serious injuries, just a few cases of smoke inhalation. But for Vincent and Clara, that half hour of confinement had changed everything. Sitting in the ambulance where paramedics checked their lungs, they looked at each other and knew there was no going back. They had declared their love in the middle of chaos, had kissed as if the world were ending. They could no longer pretend they were just colleagues. "What now?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "Now," Vincent said, lacing his fingers through hers, "we figure out how to make this work. But neither of them imagined that within a few days, Clara would make a discovery that would change everything again, forcing her to choose between the love she had found and the secrets she still held about her own story. The morning after the fire, Clara didn't show up for work. Vincent waited until 10 in the morning before calling her cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. He called again at noon, and then at 2 in the afternoon, always with the same result. A growing anxiety took hold of him. Clara never missed work without notice, never left her phone off during the day. At 4 in the afternoon, he decided to go to the address listed in her employee file. The building in Queens was old and poorly maintained, with a doorman who barely looked up from his newspaper when Vincent asked for Clara Barnes. "Apartment 405, the man grumbled, "but I think she moved out. Saw her leaving late last night with a big suitcase." Vincent felt the world spin. He took the stairs to the 4th floor 2 at a time, his heart pounding erratically. He knocked on the apartment door several times, but only heard the empty echo of an uninhabited space. "She really moved out," one of the roommates confirmed when she finally appeared. "Left in the middle of the night, said she had a family emergency. Left the keys and the outstanding rent money. It was kind of weird, actually." Vincent went down the stairs in a state of shock. Clara had run away. After they had declared their love in the middle of a life-or-death situation, after they had kissed like two people who had found their lost half, she had simply disappeared without explanation. For 3 days, he searched for her desperately. He called hospitals, checked for police reports involving her name, even hired a private investigator. But Clara Barnes had simply vanished from New York, leaving only an ache in Vincent's chest that was physically painful. It was on Thursday, exactly 1 week after the fire, that the publisher's receptionist handed him a manila envelope with his name written in a handwriting he instantly recognized. Inside the envelope was a 2-page letter and a small object wrapped in tissue paper. Vincent opened the letter first, his hands trembling slightly. "Vincent, forgive me for leaving like this, but there were some things I needed to figure out about myself before I could truly be with you. In the fire, when you said you loved me, I knew it was the truest thing I had ever heard in my life, but I also knew that I didn't really know who I was to be loved by someone like you. I grew up believing I didn't deserve to be seen, let alone desired. I spent my whole life hiding, making myself smaller, taking up the least possible space in the world. And when I finally found someone who made me want to take up space, who made me want to be seen and touched and loved, I realized I was too afraid to accept it. It's not a fear of you, Vincent. It's a fear of myself. A fear of discovering that deep down, I really am the invisible person I always thought I was. A fear of giving myself completely and finding there's nothing in me worth keeping. That's why I need to leave for a while. I need to learn to see myself through my own eyes before I can believe the way you see me. I need to find out if I exist when I'm not hiding. I found something that belonged to Gabriel while I was organizing the old archives at the publishing house. It's wrapped with this letter. I thought you would want it back. One day, when I know who I really am, maybe I'll come back, if you still want to see me. With all the love I learned to feel for you, Clara." Vincent had to read the letter 3 times before he could fully process the words. Then, with trembling fingers, he unwrapped the tissue paper and found a small silver pendant in the shape of a crescent moon. His world fell apart. The pendant had been a gift he had bought for Gabriel before the baby was even born. It was a delicate piece, custom-made by an Italian jeweler, intended to be the first gift he would give his son. After the baby's death, Vincent had desperately searched for the pendant, which had disappeared in the chaos of the fire that destroyed the apartment. He had assumed it was lost forever, along with all the other memories of Gabriel. But Clara had found it. In the publisher's archives, of all places. How had it ended up there? Vincent tried to remember, and slowly the pieces fell into place. After Gabriel's death, he had brought a few things from the destroyed apartment to the office, in a desperate attempt to maintain some connection with his son. Boxes of personal papers he had stored without opening, insurance documents, objects that had been saved from the fire. The pendant must have been in one of those boxes, forgotten for years at the bottom of a dead file. And Clara had found it by chance, recognizing its importance without knowing exactly what it was. Vincent held the pendant against his chest and cried for the first time since Gabriel's funeral. He cried for the loss of his son, for the loss of Clara, for the cruel irony of having found love only to watch it slip through his fingers again. But there was something in Clara's letter that bothered him. The way she belittled herself, the way she spoke of herself as if she were less than she was. Vincent had seen her read manuscripts with a sensitivity that bordered on the supernatural, had heard her opinions on literature, with an intelligence that left experienced editors silent. Clara was not an invisible woman. She was a woman who had been taught to become invisible, and that enraged him. It enraged him to think that someone had hurt Clara so deeply that she had internalized the idea that she didn't deserve love. It enraged him to know that she had grown up in a family that had molded a brilliant and sensitive child into an adult who was afraid of her own shadow. But more than anything, it enraged him to know that she was right about one thing. She needed to find out who she was on her own before she could truly be with someone. The days dragged on in shades of grey after Clara left. Vincent tried to throw himself into work, but everything reminded him of her. The empty desk in the editorial department, the manuscripts she had commented on, the new editorial line project they had dreamed of together. He hired a new associate editor, a competent and experienced woman, but she did her job with mechanical efficiency, without the passion Clara put into every text she read. It was Marcia who, 3 weeks later, brought the news that would change everything. "Vincent, you need to see this," she said, entering his office with a copy of an independent book in her hands. "A friend of mine who works at an alternative bookstore in Greenwich Village gave me this, said it's causing a stir in underground literary circles." Vincent took the book and read the cover, Between Desire and Silence by M. Barnes. It was a simple, clearly independent edition, but there was something in the back cover synopsis that made his stomach clench. A woman raised under the strict dogmas of a religious family finds herself torn between the obedience she learned and the desire she discovered upon falling in love with a man who carries his own scars. A story about finding one's own voice in a world that prefers female silence. Vincent opened the book to a random page and began to read. She had grown up believing her body was a temple, but no one had taught her that temples were meant to be inhabited, not just worshipped from afar. When he looked at her, she felt as if she were being seen for the first time, not as sin or temptation, but as a complete human being, worthy of both desire and reverence. The prose was unmistakably Clara's. Vincent immediately recognized her style, the way she chose her words, her sensitivity for capturing complex emotions in simple sentences. But there was something more mature in the writing, a confidence she hadn't had when they worked together. "Where did you get this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice normal. "The author is doing launches at independent bookstores around the city," Marcia replied. "No one knows who M. Barnes is, but the book is becoming a word-of-mouth phenomenon. Women are passing it to each other, creating reading groups. It's like a movement." Vincent spent the rest of the day reading the book, recognizing on every page more details of Clara's life transformed into fiction. The protagonist was named Marina, but it was clearly her. The man she fell in love with was named Victor, but his characteristics were unmistakably Vincent's. The story told of a woman who worked for a widowed editor, who fell in love with him but ran away when she realized she didn't know how to accept love without losing herself. But there was something in the narrative that surprised Vincent. Clara had written about him with a deep understanding of his pain, but also with a compassion that made him see himself in a kinder light. In the book, Victor wasn't just a man broken by grief. He was someone who had chosen solitude as a form of protection, but who still had the capacity to love deeply. And Marina, the protagonist based on Clara, was portrayed as a woman of extraordinary strength, disguised as fragility. Clara had managed to turn her own story of trauma into a narrative of empowerment, showing how someone can rebuild herself even after being systematically broken down. The book's ending was open. Marina embarked on a journey of self-discovery, leaving Victor with the implicit promise that maybe, one day, she would return whole enough to love without fear. When he finished reading, Vincent knew what he had to do. Clara had left clues about where she was through her own book, the independent bookstores, the alternative launches, the underground literary life of New York. She was hiding in plain sight, using a pseudonym but putting her entire soul on paper for anyone who knew how to recognize it. And Vincent knew how to recognize it. But before he went looking for her, he had some of his own demons to face. The success of Clara's book had attracted the attention of the literary press, and it was only a matter of time before someone made the connection between desire and silence in the life of Vincent Hayes, especially given the obvious parallels between Victor and him. Worse still, one of his former employees had approached a lawyer alleging that Vincent had created a hostile work environment through unwanted romantic advances. Felicity was an editor he had fired 6 months earlier for incompetence, but she now claimed the dismissal was retaliation for her rejecting his supposed advances. Vincent knew the accusations were false. He had never behaved inappropriately with Felicity or any other employee. But he also knew how these things worked in the press. The combination of Clara's book and Felicity's accusations would create a perfect storm of scandal that could destroy both his reputation and the publishing house. And in the midst of it all he really wanted was to find Clara and tell her that he understood her letter, that he was willing to wait as long as it took for her to find herself, but that he didn't want her to go through it alone. It was on a Friday in December, almost 2 months after Clara had disappeared, that Vincent finally discovered where she was. A review of Between Desire and Silence mentioned that the mysterious M. Barnes worked at a bookstore in Greenwich Village, where she had held one of the book's first launches. Vincent got the address and went there on a Saturday morning, when the store would be less busy, and he would have a better chance to talk to Clara without causing a scene. The bookstore was called Lost Pages, and it was exactly the kind of place where Clara would feel at home. Small, cozy, filled with used and new books coexisting harmoniously on the shelves. When he entered, the first person he saw was Clara. She was behind the counter, her hair shorter and dyed a darker brown, wearing a simple wine-colored dress that enhanced her skin tone. She looked different, more confident, more present in her own body. When their eyes met, Vincent saw surprise, fear, and something that looked like relief mixed in her expression. "Hi, Clara," he said simply. "Vincent." She said his name like a prayer. "How did you find me?" "Your book," he replied, approaching the counter. "I read every word." "It's extraordinary." Clara blushed, but she didn't look away as she used to. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, years of unsaid conversations hanging between them. Vincent noticed how she had changed. There was a new strength in her posture, a confidence she hadn't had when they worked together. But he also noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she organized papers on the counter. "Why did you come?" she finally asked. "Because I love you," Vincent answered without hesitation. "Because I read your letter 100 times and understood every word. But that didn't change the fact that I love you. And because I think maybe it's time we figured out who we are when we're not afraid." Clara felt tears threatening to overflow. For 2 months, she had convinced herself that leaving Vincent had been the right decision, that he was better off without her complicating his life. But seeing him there, in the space that had become her refuge, made all the repressed feelings come rushing back. "I wrote about us," she said, as if it were a confession. "I know," he replied, "and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever read about love. You showed me who I am through the eyes of someone who truly loves me. Vincent, you don't understand. Things are complicated now. The book is successful. People are speculating about who the author is." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And I heard about the woman who's accusing you of harassment. If they find out we had a relationship, it will make everything worse for you." Vincent felt a familiar fury rise in his chest. Felicity had gotten exactly what she wanted, to use her lies to drive Clara away from him. "I don't care about that," he said, reaching his hand over the counter to touch hers. "The only thing that matters to me is that you're here, you're whole, and maybe we can try again." Clara looked at their intertwined hands and felt as if she were seeing the future and the past meet at a single point in time. "It won't be easy," she said. "I know," Vincent replied, "but we're stronger now. You found your voice. I learned that I'm entitled to a second chance at happiness. Maybe the time is right." Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she had made 2 months ago, and the possibility of a different choice opening up before her. When she opened her eyes again, Vincent was still there, waiting, and she knew that this time she wouldn't run away. Clara closed the bookstore early that Saturday. She told the owner, Mr. Benedict, that she had a personal emergency, and he just nodded, accustomed to the eccentricities of the most dedicated employee he'd ever had. She and Vincent walked in silence through the streets of Greenwich Village, the weight of 2 months of separation and years of repressed feelings making each step deliberate and significant. Clara had rented a small room at the back of the bookstore, a practical solution that gave her independence and proximity to the work she loved. The space was tiny but cozy, with makeshift shelves full of books, a desk where she wrote every night, and a window that overlooked a small inner courtyard full of plants. "Is this where you live now?" Vincent asked, observing the environment Clara had created for herself. It was simple, but there was something deeply personal in every detail. Photographs of landscapes taped to the walls, scented candles perfuming the air, a colorful crocheted blanket on the single bed. "This is where I found out who I am," Clara corrected, putting water on to boil on the portable stove. "Want some coffee or tea? I have chamomile, which Mrs. Beatrice from the apartment next door gave me." Vincent smiled, noticing how much Clara had changed. 2 months earlier, she would never have offered anything so naturally, never have moved through her own space with such ownership. There was a lightness about her that was entirely new. "Coffee would be great," he replied, sitting in the only available chair while Clara settled on the edge of the bed. "How are you really?" she asked, after they both had their cups in hand. "I know about Felicity's accusation. I know it must be difficult." Vincent sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's frustrating, mostly because I know it's a lie. Felicity is trying to destroy me because I fired her, and she's using the movement against harassment as a personal weapon. The publisher's lawyer says there's no case, but the press is already speculating. And now, with my book being successful..." Clara couldn't finish the sentence. "Now some journalists are trying to make the connection," Vincent completed, especially after one literary critic wrote that the story seems too real to be just fiction. "But Clara, that doesn't change anything for me. If they want to destroy my reputation with lies, let them. I'm not going to give up my happiness because of it." Clara watched him for a long moment. There was a determination in Vincent she had never seen before, as if he had made an irrevocable decision about what truly mattered in his life. "You've changed," she said softly. "So have you," he replied. "You seem free, as if you've finally given yourself permission to exist." Clara smiled, a genuine, unreserved smile that lit up her entire face. "That's exactly what happened. In the first few days after I ran away, I hated myself. I thought I was a coward for leaving you, an idiot for throwing away the only good thing that had ever happened to me." She paused to take a sip of coffee. "But then I started to write for real. Not just fragments in a notebook, but the whole story. Our story. And what did you discover? That I wasn't the helpless victim I always thought I was. That being raised in a strict religious family didn't completely define me. That being harassed at 15 didn't mean I was broken forever." Clara leaned forward, seeking his eyes. "I discovered that when I write about pain, it loses its power over me. And when I write about love, it becomes real." Vincent put his cup aside and stood up, walking over to her. "Can I hug you?" The question was simple, but laden with meaning. Vincent was asking for permission not just to touch her, but to start over, to reconnect, to become important in her life again. Clara nodded, and when he wrapped his arms around her, she felt as if she had finally come home. Not to the tiny room where she lived, but to the arms of the man she had learned to love in a way she didn't know was possible. They held each other for a long time, feeling each other's warmth, breathing the same air, allowing the intimacy they had lost to slowly return. When they separated, Vincent bent his face toward hers, but stopped just inches from Clara's lips. "Are you sure?" he asked, and she knew the question referred to much more than just a kiss. In response, Clara closed the distance between them, pressing her lips against his with a tenderness that quickly turned into passion. This time, when they kissed, there was no desperate urgency like in the fire, nor the shy hesitation of their first encounters. It was the kiss of two people who had found each other, lost each other, and chosen to find each other again. "Stay," Clara whispered against his lips. "At least for today. Stay with me." Vincent agreed without words, and for the first time in months, neither of them felt like they were hiding from anything. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about the 2 months they had been apart. Vincent told her about how he had tried to find her, about the sleepless nights reading and rereading the letter she had left, about how he had realized he also needed to learn some things about himself to be truly available for a relationship. "I started therapy," he confessed. "First time in my life. I found out I never really processed the grief over Gabriel's death. I was using work to escape the pain, building a life so controlled that there was no room for real feelings. Clara took his hand. And now? Now I know I can love someone without trying to protect them from everything, including myself, Vincent replied. I know you're strong enough to choose to stay or leave, and that whatever decision you make will be respected. It was a simple declaration, but it meant everything to Clara. All her life she had dealt with men who tried to control her, her grandparents who wanted to mold her, according to their religious precepts, Ezra who had tried to manipulate her sexually, even some college classmates who thought they knew what was best for her better than she did. Vincent was saying he trusted her to make her own decisions, even if it meant losing her again. I'm not leaving again, she said, but I'm also not going back to being that woman who hid behind her office desk, afraid of her own shadow. If we're going to try this again, it has to be with who we are now, not who we were. Who are we now? Vincent asked, smiling. We are two broken people who learn to heal through words, Clara replied. Who know that love isn't something that happens to us, but something we choose to build every day. As night fell, they were lying on the small bed, Clara nestled against Vincent's chest, listening to his heartbeat like a song she had forgotten was so comforting. They hadn't made love yet. They both knew there were still practical issues to resolve, difficult conversations ahead. But they were together, and that was enough for now. It was Vincent who brought up the subject they were both avoiding. What are we going to do about the press? About the scandal? Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. We can try to hide, pretend there's nothing between us, or we can own it. Tell our side of the story before others invent one. Owning it means you'll have to reveal that you're Monsieur Barnes, Vincent said. It means exposure, loss of privacy. Are you prepared for that? Clara moved slightly to look at him. I wrote a book about a woman who learned not to hide. It would be hypocritical of me to keep hiding now. Vincent kissed her forehead. Then we'll face this together, but on our terms, under our conditions. How? An interview, he said. Just one, with a serious publication. We tell our story honestly, make it clear that our relationship began after you stopped working for me, and respond to Felicity's accusations with facts, not defensiveness. Clara nodded slowly. And what if that's not enough? What if people decide to believe her version anyway? Then at least we'll know we did the right thing, Vincent replied. Clara, I've built an entire career based on integrity. If people want to believe I'm the kind of man who harasses employees, it's because they never really knew me. But I won't sacrifice our happiness to appease people who have already decided to condemn me. The following Monday, Vincent called Marina Cole, a respected journalist from the New York Times who had interviewed several editors over the years and was known for her ethics and professionalism. He explained the situation and requested a meeting. Marina accepted immediately. The case had been circulating in literary circles for weeks, and getting the side of those involved would be a major journalistic scoop. But more than that, she had known Vincent for years and had always considered him an upstanding professional. The interview was scheduled for Thursday at the publisher's office with Clara present. It would be the first time she would return to the building where it had all begun. When they arrived together that morning, Vincent had picked Clara up from the bookstore. All the employees watched them with poorly disguised curiosity. Marcia was the first to greet Clara with a warm hug. It's so good to have you back, even if it's just for a day, she said. And congratulations on the book. I read it and was blown away. I knew you had talent, but I didn't imagine it was so profound. Clara thanked her, trying to control her nervousness. Being in that environment again, seeing her old desk occupied by someone else, passing the room where she had fallen in love with Vincent, was harder than she had imagined. Marina Cole arrived promptly at 10 in the morning. She was a woman in her 50s, with grey hair tied in an elegant bun, and intelligent eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. Before we begin, she said when they sat down in the conference room, I want to make it clear that this interview will be published in its entirety, without edits that alter the meaning of your answers. Do you agree? Vincent and Clara agreed. Excellent. Then let's start with the obvious. Are you dating? Yes, Vincent replied without hesitation. We are. And did this relationship begin when Clara was still an employee of the publishing house? No, Clara said firmly. I left the company before anything romantic happened between us. In fact, I ran away precisely because I realized I was falling in love and knew it would create conflicts. Marina asked several questions about the timeline of events, the nature of their professional relationship, and the circumstances under which Clara had left her job. Both Vincent and Clara answered honestly, not omitting the attraction between them, but making it clear that they had remained professional until the moment she decided to leave. Regarding Felicity Shaw's accusations, Marina said eventually, "Vincent, how do you respond to the allegations that you created a hostile work environment through unwanted romantic advances?" Vincent took a deep breath. "They are false and opportunistic allegations. Felicity was fired for professional incompetence. We have extensive documentation of her performance issues. There was never any kind of romantic advance on my part. I never created inappropriate situations in the workplace. The publisher's lawyer has all the necessary evidence to refute these accusations. And Clara," Marina said, turning to her, "did you witness any inappropriate behavior from Vincent toward Felicity or any other employee?" "No," Clara answered categorically. "Vincent was always professional with all the female employees. In fact, it was precisely because he always maintained a professional distance that it took me so long to realize there was something special between us. If he were the type of man who harasses employees, I'm sure I would have been one of the first victims." The interview lasted 2 hours. Marina asked tough questions about their age difference, the power dynamics in a boss-employee relationship, and how they planned to handle the public exposure. But she also asked questions about Clara's book, about how literature had been a form of healing for both of them, and about the couple's future plans. "One last question," Marina said before concluding. "Clara, do you regret writing the book? Exposing your private life in this way?" Clara looked at Vincent, who smiled encouragingly, then turned back to the journalist. "I don't regret it one bit," she said. "I wrote about pain, but also about healing, about fear, but also about courage. If my story can help other women understand that they deserve love and respect, then every word was worth it. And if some men read the book and understand how their attitudes can hurt women, even without intention, all the better." When Marina left, Vincent and Clara were alone in the conference room, holding hands, knowing they had done everything they could to tell their side of the story. "What now?" Clara asked. "Now we wait," Vincent replied. "And we trust that the truth is stronger than lies." The interview was published the following Sunday, taking up 2 pages of the Times Arts and Leisure section. The headline was, "Love in the Time of Cancellation. Publisher and writer speak out on romance, literature, and false accusations." The reaction was immediate and divided. Many people, especially women who had read Clara's book, came to the couple's defense, praising their courage in publicly acknowledging their relationship and the honesty with which they had handled the situation. Others, however, remained skeptical, arguing it was all too convenient for Clara to appear to defend Vincent just when he was being accused of harassment. Felicity gave an interview rebutting Vincent's statements, but when the magazine that interviewed her asked for concrete evidence of her allegations, she could provide nothing more than impressions and feelings about her former boss's behavior. The publishing house's internal investigation, conducted by an external compliance firm, concluded there was no evidence of inappropriate behavior on Vincent's part. Felicity's case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but the real victory came 3 weeks after the interview was published. Between Desire and Silence climbed to the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list, and Clara received offers from several major publishers, including competitors of Hayes Publishing, to publish her next book. "Ironic," Vincent commented when they heard the news. "They tried to destroy us and ended up making us even stronger." Clara smiled, snuggling into his arms on the bed of the new apartment they had rented together on the Upper East Side, a compromise between his office and the bookstore where she continued to work part-time. "I think we learned something important," she said. "What's that?" "That when you stop hiding, the world doesn't end. In fact, it gets a lot more interesting." Vincent kissed her, knowing she was right. They had faced storms, accusations, scandals, and had come out the other side not just intact, but more united. They had learned that true love wasn't something you protected by hiding, but something you strengthened by facing challenges together. And there was still one last chapter to be written. 6 months after the interview that changed everything, on a warm March evening, Clara was sitting on the balcony of their Upper East Side apartment, finishing the final proofs of her second book. Women Who Won't Be Silenced was set to be released in April, this time by Hayes Publishing itself, a decision that had initially generated controversy but proved to be the right one when pre-orders broke sales records. Vincent came home carrying a bottle of champagne and a smile that lit up his entire face. "Good news?" Clara asked, getting up to greet him with a kiss that still gave her butterflies, even after nearly a year of being officially together. "The best," he replied, setting the bottle on the table and wrapping his arms around her waist. "The movie." Clara's eyes widened. 3 months ago, an independent film producer had approached Vincent, interested in acquiring the rights to Between Desire and Silence for a film adaptation. The negotiations had been long and complex, but finally, "They agreed to all our conditions," Vincent said, spinning Clara in the air. "You'll co-write the screenplay with the director. You'll have creative control over the adaptation and a percentage of the profits that will make you financially independent forever." Clara felt tears of joy stream down her face. They weren't just tears for her professional success, but for the realization that she had found someone who celebrated her victories as if they were his own, who supported her unconditionally in every decision. "And there's more," Vincent said, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. "There's something I've wanted to ask you for months, but I was waiting for the right moment." Clara's heart raced as she saw Vincent kneel before her, holding a small blue velvet box. "Clara Barnes," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you taught me that it's possible to love without fear, that it's possible to give yourself completely without losing yourself. You brought me back to life in a way I thought was impossible." He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with an emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "Will you marry me?" Clara was speechless for a moment, looking at the man who had transformed her understanding of love, of herself, of what was possible when two people decided to build something together. "Yes," she whispered, then repeated more loudly, "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then stood to kiss her with a passion that contained all the months of struggle, overcoming and discovery they had gone through together. "Why an emerald?" Clara asked when they finally separated, admiring the ring that fit her finger perfectly. "Because you once wrote in one of your notebooks that emeralds are stones of renewal," Vincent replied, "and you renewed my entire life." Clara remembered the line, written on a lonely afternoon months before she met Vincent in person. It was further proof of how fate had conspired to bring them together, even when she didn't know he existed in her life. That night, for the first time, they made love completely. There were no more fears, no more secrets, no more reasons to hold back. Clara gave herself to Vincent with a passion that had been stored away for 26 years, and he received her with a reverence that turned every touch into a declaration of love. When Clara moaned his name at the peak of her pleasure, Vincent knew he had found his home, and when he whispered "I love you" against her skin afterward, Clara knew she had finally become the woman she always had the potential to be, whole, desired, loved. "It doesn't hurt," she whispered against his chest after they had quieted. "What doesn't?" Vincent asked, stroking her hair. "Being seen," Clara replied. "Being touched, being loved. I thought it would hurt, but it's the most natural thing in the world." Vincent kissed her forehead, understanding the entire journey she had taken to reach this moment of total acceptance of herself and her desires. "It's because you learned to love yourself first," he said. "And when you love yourself, you can believe that others can love you too." The wedding was set for December, a small, intimate ceremony in the garden of the brownstone they had bought in the West Village, a beautiful old house, full of character, with a library on the second floor where they could both work, and a garden in the back perfect for afternoons of reading outdoors. Clara chose to wear her mother's dress, a simple but elegant piece that her grandparents had kept, and that she retrieved on a trip to her hometown to make peace with her past. She visited her grandparents' graves, brought flowers for the parents she had barely known, and had long conversations with some old neighbors who remembered her as the quiet girl who always had her nose in a book. "They would be proud of you," one of the neighbors said, flipping through a copy of Between Desire and Silence that Clara had brought as a gift. "Even if they didn't quite understand this whole writing books thing, they always knew you were special." Reconciling with her past was important for Clara. She had spent so much time running from her own story that she had forgotten to look at the good parts. her grandparents' love, even if expressed rigidly, the education she had received, the values of honesty and perseverance that had been planted in her character. Vincent made his own peace as well. He visited Gabriel's grave for the first time in 3 years, bringing Clara with him. He talked to his dead son about the extraordinary woman he had found, about how he had learned that loving someone new didn't mean loving those who were gone any less. "I think he would approve of you," Vincent said to Clara as they left flowers at the small plot. Gabriel always liked kind people. The wedding was exactly as they had dreamed, intimate, meaningful, focused on what truly mattered. Marcia was Clara's maid of honor. The publisher's lawyer was Vincent's best man, and Mr. Benedict, the bookstore owner, gave a moving speech about how he had witnessed Clara's blossoming as a woman and a writer. "When she first came to my store, she was like a frightened little bird," he said. "Today she's flying higher than any of us could have imagined." The party lasted late into the night, with poetry, music, and much laughter. Clara danced for the first time in her life, in Vincent's arms, without worrying about what people would say, without fear of taking up too much space in the world. During their honeymoon in Italy, a country they had chosen for its art and literary history, they planned their future. Hayes Publishing would launch a new collection called Feminine Voices, dedicated exclusively to female authors telling stories of overcoming and empowerment. Clara would be the curator of the collection, working part-time at the publishing house and part-time on her own projects. "Are you sure you want to hire me back?" Clara joked one afternoon in Florence as they walked through the narrow streets. "People will say it's nepotism." "Let them," Vincent replied, pulling her in for a kiss in front of a centuries-old bookshop. "If I can't hire the best editor I know just because I'm married to her, then the world has lost its mind." When they returned to the States, they found a surprise waiting. 3 international publishers had made offers to translate Between Desire and Silence into English, French, and Spanish. The book was becoming a global phenomenon, especially among women who identified with Clara's journey of self-discovery and empowerment. "It's surreal," Clara said to Vincent one morning, looking at emails from readers around the world who shared their own stories of overcoming after reading her book. "To think that words I wrote in my tiny little room are touching women in Japan, in France, in Argentina." "It's the power of truth," Vincent replied. "When you write the truth about human feelings, it resonates regardless of language or culture." Clara's second book, Women Who Won't Be Silenced, was launched on a rainy April night at a bookstore in Greenwich Village, the same one where she had hidden and found herself 2 years earlier. The line of readers wrapped around the block, and it took Clara 3 hours to sign every copy. "How does it feel to be an officially famous writer?" a journalist asked during the launch. Clara looked at Vincent, who was at the back of the bookstore watching everything with a proud smile, and then replied, "I feel like someone who finally learned how to use her own voice and discovered that it's stronger than I ever imagined." 2 years after their wedding, on a sunny October morning, Clara was in the garden of their house revising the proofs of her 3rd book when Vincent came running home from the office. "Clara!" he shouted, still at the gate. "You have to see this." He was carrying a copy of Time magazine, and on the cover was a photo of Clara smiling with the headline, "The New Voices of Women's Literature: How One American Writer is Changing Conversations About Love and Empowerment Around the World." Clara held the magazine with trembling hands, reading about herself described as one of the most important literary voices of her generation, about how her books had inspired women in dozens of countries to tell their own stories, about how she was redefining what it means to be a strong woman in contemporary literature. 3 years ago, I was an invisible woman who was afraid of her own shadow," she said to Vincent. "How is this possible?" "This is possible," he replied, wrapping her in his arms, "because you had the courage to stop hiding, because you decided you deserved to be seen, heard, loved, and because you never gave up on believing that your story mattered." Clara rested her head on her husband's chest, listening to the sound of the birds in the garden, smelling the scent of the flowers they had planted together, knowing she had finally found her place in the world. "You knew," she said suddenly. "Knew what?" "That first day, when you hired me. You knew I was more than I appeared to be." Vincent smiled, remembering the shy woman in the navy blue blazer who had walked into his office 3 years earlier. "I didn't know exactly what you were, but I knew there was something special. There was a light in you even when you were trying to dim it. And you? Me? Did you know you were capable of loving again? Vincent grew thoughtful for a moment. No, I thought that part of me had died with Gabriel. You taught me that the heart has an infinite capacity for love, that loving someone new doesn't diminish the love we feel for those we've lost. That night, after making love with the renewed passion of a couple who chooses to start dating again every day, even within marriage, Clara and Vincent talked about their future plans. The international production company wanted Clara to write an original series for a streaming service based on her experiences as an American woman navigating tradition and modernity. "It's tempting," she said, "but I think I want to finish the book trilogy first. There's still so much I want to say about women, about love, about how we find our strength." And after the trilogy, Clara smiled, stroking his chest lazily. "After the trilogy, I want to write about you. About me. About us. About how two broken people can come together and form something more beautiful than they ever were apart. About how true love isn't finding someone perfect, but finding someone who is perfect for you." Vincent kissed her slowly, knowing that whatever words Clara wrote about them would be, like everything that came from her pen, a masterpiece of emotional honesty. "What do you want to call it?" he asked. Clara thought for a moment, then smiled. "The Man Who Taught Me to Fly. And what if I don't like how you portray me?" "Then," Clara said, kissing him back, "you'll have to live with the fact that your wife is a writer who isn't afraid to tell the truth." Vincent laughed, pulling her closer. "I wouldn't change a single comma of the woman you've become." "And I wouldn't change a period of you," Clara replied. And there in the home they had built together, surrounded by the books they loved and the dreams they were realizing one by one, Vincent Hayes and Clara Barnes knew they had found something that many people search for their entire lives without finding, a love that not only weathered storms, but grew stronger because of them. Clara never felt invisible again. Vincent never felt dead inside again. And together, they discovered that sometimes the most beautiful love story is the one that begins when two people stop trying to be perfect and accept being true. The final chapter of their story would not be written in Clara's books, but in the life they would build together over the next 50 years, a life filled with words, passion, partnership, and the certainty that they had found in each other the person with whom they wanted to face all the chapters yet to come. And when Clara, years later, was asked about the secret to a happy marriage, she would always give the same answer. Find someone who sees you for who you really are and loves that exact person. Then work together to become the best versions of yourselves, not to please the world, but to be worthy of the love you've received. Vincent, for his part, would say, find someone who turns your life into a story worth telling, and then live that story with all the intensity you can muster. And so, between written pages and transformed lives, Vincent and Clara discovered that true love is not a destination, but a journey they chose to walk side by side, word by word, day by day, forever.